Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Jim Torrance of the National Network of Sector Partners, and I'm your moderator for today's webinar. Our presenter today is Colin Austin of MDC Inc. in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and he's going to share his experience, including both successes and challenges, which we all can learn from, with the Latino Pathways project. But I'll let him tell you more about that in a moment. I don't know. There we go. To minimize background noise, we have muted all the phone lines, so your phone line is muted. But as we call on you, we'll unmute you. And if you haven't logged in yet with your audio PIN, we'll send you a reminder. If you don't log in, we won't be able to unmute you at all, so we do want you to do that so that you can contribute to the discussion after Colin's presentation. And if you have any audio or other technical problems, please let us know by raising your hand or sending us a question. We are recording this session, and we're going to make this session available afterwards. We'll send everyone who registered for the webinar an email with the link to the recording, the slideshow, and the original report that Colin produced. So if you want to share this information with others, you can. And if you need to step away for a moment, don't worry, you can revisit the recording later. Just to give you a sense of how to control things with your control panel, there are two ways for you to get our attention. The first is to raise your hand by clicking the button with the picture of a hand on it. And if your hand goes up, we'll call on you the next break in the action. You can also click the button to lower your hand if you do so by mistake, or if you change your mind and find that your question has been answered. You can also send us questions using the questions pane in the control panel. And feel free to send us questions as they occur to you, but know that we're going to hold most questions until the question and answer period after the main presentation. Yeah, I don't know why that's not working. There we go. And one more, I think. Try again. There we go. If we don't get to your question before the end of the webinar, we'll email you an answer to your question afterwards. And we may also answer some questions in the questions pane as we go along if we find a question that can be easily answered that way and whose information will be useful to everyone. A few words about us. We are the NNSP is a project of the Insight Center for Community Economic Development. We're a national nonprofit consulting research and advocacy group. Our mission is community economic development, helping low-income communities. And in addition to NNSP, some of our initiatives are Californians for Economic Security, Closing the Racial Wealth Gap, Inclusive Business Initiative, or InBiz, and the economic power of early care and education. So you can look at our website for more information. I joined NNSP about a year ago after 10 years working as a practitioner, and I had learned about NNSP first through NNSP's first national conference in 2001, and was really just thrilled to connect with others around the country who were doing sector work, developing and implementing industry sector-based training and employment programs. So as of today, we have about 350 individual members from 250 or so organizations around the country, representing all different types of organizations. And we have another conference coming up in November in Washington, D.C. We also offer our members webinars such as this one, newsletters and updates with the latest information about developments relevant to the sector field. Competitive mini-grants, such as the one that made the report that Colin will present possible through the Strategic Venture Fund, and connections to others around the country. So if you're interested in industry sector-focused workforce development, we invite you to join us, and you can find information about us at NNSP.org. I'd like to launch a quick poll to see who's on the line and to get a sense of what type of organizations you represent. So I'm going to launch this poll. Take a moment to click and on the organization type that best describes you. And I recognize that this is not a comprehensive list, so you may find yourself in the other category, but it's always interesting to see who is participating. And we'll give you about 10 more seconds to place your votes. Okay, I'm going to close the poll now. And these are the results. So interestingly, there are a great number of representatives from public workforce agencies on the call today, and that's great. We know that reaching all aspects of your communities are very important to you, and partnerships such as the one Colin is going to describe are a very relevant way of doing that. So, you know, I think it's clear that a wide range of organizations are interested in this subject, and it's good to have you all on the line. So without further ado, I'll introduce Colin Austin and let him describe the work that he's done there in North Carolina.
Okay, thank you, Jim. As I'm looking at my photo, I realize it's quite a mugshot there. It's great to have a chance to share a little bit about Latino Pathways. My name is Colin Austin. I'm with a nonprofit organization called MDC. We've worked throughout the South helping to do research and design and manage demonstration projects, and Latino Pathways is one of those projects. So a lot of people had a hand in this, but it's my pleasure to share a little bit about some of the things that we learned during the process. So let me just dive in, and I'm going to go through the PowerPoint at a fairly steady pace because I want to make sure that we have time at the end for some questions and discussion. The main question that I considered in the paper and report that I wrote is, what is different about sector strategies for immigrants? And what do we know about what works and what does not? And let's go ahead and flip to the next slide. I wanted to start with a quote from a recent report from the new Commission on the Skills of the American Workforce. Most of the people who will be in our workforce are already in it. The point is, and the point that they make in this report is that in order to be internationally competitive, everybody in the adult workforce will need a higher level of education and training, what they call new literacy skills. As they do so, our economy will become much more productive. Next. So who is in our current workforce? Considering the topic of this presentation, how many are immigrant workers? Well, this research from the CBO indicates that a very significant number of U.S. workers today are first-generation immigrants. Next. So what about the future? This chart shows how our population is expected to grow through 2050. On the left column, you'll see that the population of the United States is expected to grow by over 120 million people by 2050, and that most of this growth is due to immigration, this orange section of the bar. But what I really want you to see is the right-hand column. If you just look at growth in the working age population, it's almost entirely driven by immigrants. In other words, our future workforce is very immigrant dependent. Next. So what's happened in North Carolina? In 1980, North Carolina had a small but growing Latino population. Many were Puerto Ricans working at military bases. Others were migrant farm workers from Florida, Texas, Mexico, some from Central America. These individuals and families were pioneers that established inroads and helped to prepare the way for the economic boom in the 1990s and beyond. By 2005, the Latino population of North Carolina had increased tenfold. Economic growth created many jobs in construction, services, housekeeping, road building, food processing, and also many professionals. Immigrants really provided the critical labor force that enabled North Carolina to grow as it did. But these demographic changes also brought new challenges. How would schools, public agencies respond? Are North Carolina institutions ready for these kinds of changes? And the question that I consider in this report is, how could immigrants be prepared to meet the higher skill needs of the future? So what MDC did is we designed this really cool looking logo. And then we thought, well, we might need to do more than that. So we also came up with a theory of change, and the next slide, and started kind of kicking around this idea about building a community partnership, providing them with data, coaching, and seed funding, that if given that, they would be able to put together a program that would both create some new economic opportunities for Latino job seekers, but at the same time support some of our industry growth sectors. So one of the messages of Latino Pathways is that it's not just a charitable program. It really actively seeks to support industry growth and overall economic development. Next. So here's kind of a quick rundown on sector initiatives. I think that many of you on the line are very familiar with sector work. Some of you are not. Sector strategies target a specific industry. They work with partnerships. They have a dual customer approach, is the way we say it, that both trying to improve conditions for low-wage workers and at the same time trying to serve industry and employers and help them make changes that will increase the strength of that industry sector. As the concept of Latino Pathways developed, we chose sector strategies as the method that we could use to bring focus to the project and have a greater impact. In the paper that I wrote, I talk about my sector conversion experience and kind of the powerful way that sector combines workforce development and economic development. And there were several key individuals from the National Network of Sector Partners at that time that you could say were proselyting this idea of sector work, and it's just very impressive. And I noticed that Saming Tom is on the line, and he was definitely one of the people that really influenced me. And what they had to show was a real data-driven approach, a kind of a comprehensive approach that held this opportunity to connect with economic development. In the paper, I quote Jack Litzenberg of the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, who said, sectoral programs by their very design train workers to meet the specific needs of industry, which can dramatically improve outcomes for both. So this was a new kind of jobs program, or at least an attempt to meet both the needs of industry and people, low-income job seekers. And I would just like to mention that the Mott Foundation has really been a major supporter of sector initiatives from the beginning and has provided in many ways support for this idea. And I recommend also the Sector Academy. I've noticed a few people from my group when I attended the Sector Academy are on the line, and that was also an excellent opportunity to learn more about this field. So next slide. After several months of talking to people and communities across the state, we identified Charlotte and Greensboro as places that had a high potential for a successful project. Now, what were the criteria? We were looking for places that had a growing Latino population, Latino-led community organizations, community colleges that wanted to work on bridging students from English language classes to skills training. We were looking for support from local leaders, and finally and importantly, support from local funders. Following this theory of change, we organized a partnership team and began this initial phase of research. I've got a couple mix-ups here. The first should read quantitative data. That's where we went through a lot of the sector methodology on pulling together the demographics, industry growth, occupational projections, so forth. We also looked at qualitative data and did some focus group interviews and interviews with individuals, and identified who the partner should be and started forming the team. Next. Here's an example of the kind of data we examined. This one stood out because you can see how segmented the labor market is for Latino workers. In this case, in the Greensboro metropolitan area, 1/3 of, probably more, of construction laborers are Latino in that metropolitan area. But when you look at nurse aides or home health aides, it's really down significantly to 1.6%. If you look at higher skilled health professions, it's very low. Only 4 people out of over 2,000 that were LPNs or licensed vocational nurses. Next. So then the next step was to work with the partnership group to actually design this project. We had to go through a process of selecting the industry sector. Today I'm going to mainly talk about healthcare because that was one of the major focus, but there were other sectors as well. We looked at best practices and models, went on a site visit to a model program, read about a lot of other sector projects, had the Workforce Strategy Center come in and talk to us about employer engagement and other things, put together a staffing plan, and then let me just highlight the last bullet, as this was the source of some confusion and delay as we sorted out leadership and responsibilities, but this issue of partner roles and accountability turned out to be a very important one as well. Next. So finally, the rubber met the road. There were some false starts and some rearranging, but both sites hired project coordinators and began working with real people, starting to recruit individuals, get them going on a pathway, getting people connected with training. Next. So we knew from the research that Latino Pathways would need to address multiple barriers. I mention this because it gets back to this question of what is different about working with immigrant workers. I would say that all of these all of these obstacles, including language, low educational attainment, cultural expectations, and this disconnect with the labor market services, all of these obstacles are in play in most sector projects, but they are manifest in the extreme for many immigrant workers. We had a tough time jump-starting Latino Pathways because of that 4th bullet. In North Carolina, there just simply was no functioning pathway for immigrant workers, and very little institutional infrastructure to support one. Next. So that's where we started. That real progress must start with institutional change. There was not enough to create a standalone project, but that we had to change the way that the employment system operates. And in our case, really create a lot of the employment system. Next. I'm glad that there are a lot of folks from public workforce agencies on the line today because we did a lot of work with the OneStop Centers. They were partners in our efforts in both Greensboro and Charlotte. What were some of the ways that they needed to change in order to serve this immigrant population? The OneStop Centers in both project sites used Latino Pathways to find ways to increase their services to the Latino population. In Greensboro, for example, they had computer and orientation training for Latino job seekers, the first time that a group of Latinos had ever visited the OneStop Center. They began enrolling individuals in for federal training funds. Latino Pathways also encouraged discussions and helped in the hiring of bilingual staff in key positions and developing some targeted programs for immigrant workers. Next. It would be hard to overstate the role of the community colleges at both sites. They really played a very key and central role. We've got a few people from Central Piedmont Community College on the line this afternoon. They launched several innovative combinations of vocational training with language instruction in the context of particular industries. I think getting more details about that information could be very important if you're a college. Guilford Tech modified its basic skills training to meet the needs of students that were still learning English. Both colleges adapted their schedule of instruction to meet the needs of working adults, switching to have evening courses, weekend courses. At both sites, what we saw was the colleges using Latino Pathways as a lever to expand their offerings and create change. Next. And to serve immigrant population, there need to be new players in the workforce system. Some community-based grassroots organizations can be a trusted link for Latino residents. And the Latino Pathways Project brought some of these grassroots organizations to the workforce table by giving them an important role in the local partnership team. One of these organizations is the Latin American Coalition in Charlotte. In Greensboro, initially it was the Centro de Acción Latino in Casa Guadalupe, who did a lot conducting outreach and recruitment. They also were educating community members about workforce services, promoting career advancement, gathering feedback, and in some ways being a voice for the community on employment issues. In Greensboro, later in the project, the Welfare Reform Liaison Project joined on and helped to bring their expertise with training and workforce development to bear. They're the Community Action Agency in Greensboro. Next. So here's just a snapshot of some of the results after 2 years of implementation. A number of people moved through the system and some through into employment. Here I just have into health-related jobs, but there were others that went into other industries as well. The point I'd like to make out of this is that many of the students that enrolled in Latino Pathways needed to increase their basic skills. Some needed to obtain a GED. Almost all needed to improve their language ability before they could pursue even short-term vocational training. Next. Okay, so as Jim mentioned, a lot of times we want to kind of sweep mistakes under the rug. After all, we don't want to make our project look like a failure, especially if it may jeopardize funding. But I wanted to present a few of our gaffes, sort of in the spirit of learning. And I would say that one thing we did well in Latino Pathways was to recognize mistakes and make some adjustments along the way. But one mistake we made is that we started with partnership groups that were too broad and too large, too many different interests at the table, even though they were interested in what was happening. I think it held us back for a while and led me to conclude, as others, that the best partnership is one where you have just the people who you need to be at the table there and no others. And I think we eventually got to the right size group, but it took us a while. Healthcare careers were unfamiliar to Latino immigrants. It seems obvious now that we think about the data and how few people were in a healthcare pathway. But this, there wasn't any history or connections or understanding of what a career in that industry would be like. And I think that some of those cultural issues and a lack of networks and familiarity played a role in making it difficult for people to move forward. Our partnerships tried, I think, very courageously to really create a pathway for immigrants. And as I said, because of the lack of institutional infrastructure there, and for example, Latino workers were not going to the OneStop Centers. Latino workers were not moving from English language classes to any kind of training in the college. Very few were. So there just weren't those pathways in place. Employers didn't really understand, especially in healthcare, how to work with immigrant job seekers and workers. So what happened was we designed programs that really tried to create an entire pathway, and we found that we just couldn't manage that. These projects were relatively modest. They had one project coordinator at each site and the strength of this partnership team behind them. But it was just too much to try to work with a person all the way from recruiting in the community to post-employment retention and advancement services and everything in between. So that was, I think, a mistake, was to just take too much on instead of trying to isolate particular gaps. And then I think lack of industry involvement hurt us in many ways, but especially when we started hitting policies that kept people back, whether those were policies about who could attend what kinds of classes at the college, policies about hiring, about language ability and certification, policies about who could receive services at various public agencies and so forth. We really needed industry at that point, I think, to help address the policy, and we didn't have enough industry support at that stage. Next. And so let me just also add a couple of lessons from what's called the Sector Employment Initiative. The Sector Employment Initiative, well, there's a new report from what's called the Sector Employment Initiative. It's written by a group called Public-Private Ventures. They have been tracking several several of the more established sector programs over many years. Again, the Mott Foundation, other supporters have been very smart about analyzing and tracking these sector strategies as they've been developed across the country. Well, here are some of the things that they came up with that I think also ring true for Latino Pathways. One thing the Sector Employment Initiative found was that for participants in sector programs, their wages did increase, an average of about $2 an hour. They had higher quality jobs, and they were able to find work often in targeted sectors. But at the same time, they found that most of these sector programs had difficulty recruiting qualified participants. And I mentioned this a little bit in our experience as well, that a lot of the people that we were working with were not ready to jump right into kind of vocational and skills training. And that English language learning takes a long time. And so I think it's a real credit to the colleges that they were able to design some new curriculum that brought English language learning and vocational training together. And then, of course, on this point, there's the issue of work authorization. And many people were just not able to access the kind of services they needed because they didn't have a Social Security number. So the second bullet, which I think was an important lesson from this sector employment initiative, and that's that many of the programs, well, some of the programs did not look at the systems and really try to change the employment systems, that they would have a single organization try to do it all themselves. I think that we did well, that Latino Pathways did very well on this point, especially in changing some of the things that were happening at the community colleges, at the OneStop Centers, and even changing the practices at the community-based organizations. That there, I think, because of Latino Pathways, there's much more of a connection between those institutions and an employment system beginning to take shape. And then finally, this question of credibility with the industry. This, as the report says, takes time. In Latino Pathways, employers wanted interviews right away, wanted people to interview right away. And, you know, building trust really took the time as the project was able to produce results. It's important to have someone, I think both in the partnership group and on the project staff, that really had contacts in the particular industry and knowledge about that industry. So those are some of the lessons, and let's go on to the last few slides here. So I end my paper with a few questions that I think are remaining. One is this issue of a lot happened at the community colleges during Latino Pathways. What is the potential for community colleges to be hubs for this kind of sector activity? I think there's some great potential there, and but still a lot of relationships to work out, and I think institutional change from higher administration as well to really think about colleges as the go-to place for workers that need a variety of kinds of training and supports. It started to make more sense to think about incumbent worker strategies, especially for immigrant workers that may have had a high concentration in a particular industry, that they understood, that they knew some people, trying to figure out ways to move up within construction, for example, or others, I think may make a lot of sense as a sector strategy, instead of trying to route people into entirely new industry sectors where there may be very little or no representation. I just mentioned, you know, I think we all felt the need for more streamlined sector methods. Pulling together the data was really important, but I think what we were wanting, or looking back, what I would say now is to figure out how to sequence that so a lot of the planning can be done a little more quickly, and perhaps focus more, instead of on secondary data and charts and graphs, to focus more on gaining industry knowledge and thinking about how to build credibility with that industry. You know, what is the role of community-based organizations in sector? I think that's a great general question for sector as well. In North Carolina, the Latino-based CBOs are still very small. I don't know if Sarabi Jain is on the line. I think she had signed up. The NCLR had a great workshop that we attended in Chicago a couple years back about how Latino CBOs participate. In some places there are a few really tremendous organizations, Instituto del Progreso Latino in Chicago and others, that can really carry a project. But for the most part, in the South and many other places, Latino-based CBOs are still fairly small. Jobs is a big priority, but just don't have the history or experience behind that. And so what is the best role there? And then this last issue, which I think we didn't get a very good grasp on during Latino Pathways, was what pathways are culturally appropriate. We did do a lot of interviews, but I think that there's a lot there, a lot more consideration of the cultural issues as you select industry sectors and try to map out pathways. Next. just wanted to end by listing some of the funding partners, and I do this to just kind of give you an example of organizations that supported this kind of work. In Charlotte, which is sort of a center of commerce, banking, and we did get some support from Bank of America, Wachovia, Duke Energy, a Foundation for the Carolinas, which is the local community foundation. Next. In Greensboro, we received several different grants from family foundations, the community foundation, the workforce board made an important commitment. And I just wanted to show these to say, you know, we had to kind of piece this together from many sources because in general, and I would say to an even greater extent today, there just isn't a lot of funding streams, especially for immigrant workers. That, you know, the tide has gone out, and you really have to be thinking about reaching, you know, local funders and others and piecing this together. Next. But I did want to say we had a great regional funder, the Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation. They supported us for 4 years, and it turned out what I think was a really important project for North Carolina. The Annie E. Casey Foundation has been a tremendous supporter of innovative workforce practices, and their 8-year jobs initiative, I think, is still the benchmark for all workforce projects and one that we all look to. And then I spoke about the key role that the Mott Foundation has played in sector programs, and so they also provided support. Next and last. So there's my contact information. You know, as Jim noted, we may not have time for all the questions or be able to talk through everything. I'd be happy to respond if you wanted to email me or call me at a future time about some of the things we've been doing. So that is Latino Pathways.
Thank you so much, Colin. And you know, it's so helpful to learn about the you know, how a sector initiative develops over time. So often we are learning about successful programs and organizations without learning about how they got there, and it's really illustrative to see get an insight into your process. And thank you so much for sharing what you feel like you learned along the way. I also want to thank you for recognizing the way that NNSP played a part in the development of your own approach to this work, and for mentioning the Mott Foundation, which is one of NNSP's major supporters and is a major supporter of work in this field. Mott, together with Ford, are the two funders that the Strategic Venture Fund, NNSP, which has made this webinar possible. I want to mention also the latest report of public-private ventures that you brought up. It's a very significant report for the field. In particular, it's the first random assignment study of outcomes associated with well-implemented sector initiatives, and 3 sector initiatives, one of which is Wisconsin Regional Training Program, but also JVS in Boston and Perscolas in Bronx, New York. They actually recruited twice as many participants as they plan to enroll, or randomly selected to participate in programs. Outcomes for over 1,000 people were tracked and compared, and the results are that well-run sector initiatives produce significant earnings gains over the long term for participants. So, you know, I invite you to look at that on PPV's website, www.ppv.org. And we did send information about this and about some of the policy implications to NNSP members in the form of our newsletters. You can look for those newsletters on our website. Amazingly, I couldn't get PowerPoint to put an inverted question mark before the title of this slide. So
that's okay, because in Spanish you would have it inverted before anyway, so that's perfect.
Right. So instead I put the inverted question mark right in the middle of things. And I want to encourage questions. We've already received some questions, which we'll get to in a moment. But just a reminder, to ask questions, you can raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon that's on the upper left of your control panel, the little tab that sticks out from the control panel. or you can type questions into the questions pane, which should be at the bottom of your control panel. And we'll try to call people in the order that we get your questions. And if we, as Colin said, and I really appreciate your willingness to connect with people offline, if we don't get to your questions in time, we'll email you answers. So before we get to that, and while you're thinking of your questions, I do have a second poll, and it has to do with some of the context of this, which is just how important is the immigrant workforce going to be to the future workforce of your area. And you know, this seems like a fundamental question for your thinking about the way that your programs need to be tailored now to address future needs. So take a look at this, take a few moments to vote, and then we'll see what the results suggest. And we'll give a couple more seconds and then close the poll. Okay, I'll close it now. So, you know, not surprisingly, especially considering the demographic shift and the fact that immigrants are going to make up most of the growth of the workforce over the next years, most of you say that it's critical to be addressing the immigrant workforce in your programs, and that the workforce of your area is going to be significantly impacted by how we respond to their needs. And it's either important or critical. So your presentation is very timely, Colin. Okay, well, let's see if we can ask our first question. And we're going to unmute, let's see, Sunera Takaram. And let's see, are you there, Sunera?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
I had a question about, you mentioned during your presentation that some of the immigrants didn't have Social Security numbers, and so they couldn't be placed. How did you handle that issue?
Okay, that's a good question. Each partnership had discussed this, and both came to the same conclusion, was that if that we weren't going to screen individuals necessarily for Social Security numbers, but that in our orientations and presentations on this and recruitment efforts would tell people what they would need in order to get registered for certain classes, to be able to take certain jobs. The way it worked out was that for and that you know, at what stage and in what organization they would be asked for documentation. In effect, what happened was that individuals without Social Security numbers, without work authorization, you know, were referred to services that they were eligible for. But the focus of Latino Pathways was really, because it was about sector strategies and career pathways, was really on individuals who were able to access the kinds of support services, a full range of support services to get through the training, and then to be able to move up on the job over time within an industry.
Sunera, does that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
And we have a question from Ann Bacon of the North Carolina Rural Center, and I'm going to unmute you now. And I think her question has to do with who should really be at the table if you're defining the you know, the right-sized group. So Ann, are you there?
Yes. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Colin. We've done a lot of work with multiple organizations and trying to bring in partnerships, and we will likely do more with the nonprofit community. And I was interested to hear your bit about it getting to be too big of a group and too broad. So is there some size at which after that the dynamic just gets unwieldy, or are there some criteria that you would suggest for thinking about whether an organization is close enough to your mission?
Yeah, let me provide a kind of a short answer to that, and then I wonder, Jim, if you could, if she doesn't mind, if you could unmute Annette Taylor, who was the chair of our partnership group in Charlotte. She was with the Foundation for the Carolinas at that time, and have her also respond to this question.
And just so Annette knows, I have gone ahead and unmuted you.
Yes, okay. I noticed. Thank you.
Sorry, Annette. But,
no problem.
So we started out in Latino Pathways with partnerships that were probably about 20 people. And, it was great because there was some enthusiasm and, lots of people interested, elected officials, Chamber of Commerce, lots of different agencies, people from city and county government especially. It was great, I think, initially to get the word out and to get some energy going. But after about a year, it just got to be unwieldy. I would say, in our case, in both projects, it came down to some of the key service providers, and I would say those would be the community-based organizations, the community colleges for sure, and the OneStop Centers / local workforce boards were probably the three major entities that were working on institutional change. Now, in addition, I would say it was also really helpful to have somebody from the funding community, and in this case, a community foundation, and a local civic leader that had some ability to make things happen. Now we did have that in Charlotte as well. So my thought is really you're probably looking at something more like 7, maybe up to 10 people or so. But those that really, and of course employers.
Yeah.
And so and I think one of the things in sector methodology is that after you design the program, you bring on a host of, set up a whole employer committee. We really weren't able to do that. We made some good inroads with employers as far as getting feedback from them about the project and getting them to hire people. But as far as participating in the design and so forth, that was really difficult. So, I'd say, again, the 4 key constituencies would be especially Latino-based community organizations, public workforce system, community college employers, and then if there are just some key civic leaders. Annette, what are some of your thoughts?
That is exactly what I'm thinking, Colin. I agree with you completely on the funding groups and the civic leaders. I definitely think it was important to have the chamber at the table, but in my mind, I expected them to play a more active role in identifying employers who do not have access issues. But I do believe the lead folks at the table would need to be more proactive about identifying these employers who can be more engaged, and also employer groups who are associated with a particular sector, such as associations, who can help us make the connection where there are not these access issues. If we want to choose to, not, identify them by Social Security number.
I would echo what Annette just said. We did a lot of work with individual employers, like a hospital, a huge retailer, and we needed to do more. I think there would have been better opportunities with industry associations. We weren't able to make good connections there, but I would definitely recommend that as a way to go. We did have the chambers involved in the partnerships to some extent, but I think Annette is quite right that we needed more help.
Okay, well,
that's very helpful. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. I want to unmute Gwen Rubenstein. And Gwen, if you could mention which organization you represent in asking your question, that would be really helpful. So let's see, are you there?
I'm here, yes, thank you. Okay. Hi, this is Gwen Rubenstein, and I'm with Washington Area Women's Foundation. This has been a really interesting presentation and very helpful in our planning and thinking here in our region. And my question is, were you able to, or do you plan to tease out any differences in the project and participation or outcomes or needs or things people bring to the table, for example, based on gender?
This, I think, is an excellent question for the sector field in general, because often what happens when you look at industry sectors, in particular occupations, they're very gender-centric. So, for example, we had 5 rounds of nurse assistant classes. Mm-hmm. Well, I think almost 95% of those students were women. In some of the other sectors, it's really more heavily tilted toward men. So I think a gender analysis of what's happening in the sector field is something that is still really needed. It's something that I know Susan Crandall has worked on. I think Sarabi as well might have, Jane has also worked in that area, but how gender plays out is important. Let me just ask, I think Beth Coe is on our call. She's with Central Piedmont Community College and has been involved with some of the CNA training at first, and I think with other trainings now that Central Piedmont has been involved with. They've started a whole new area of technical career ladders for English language learners. And Beth, that's Beth Coe, K-O-O, if you could unmute her. Beth, I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about what you're seeing as far as gender dynamics in those programs.
Hi, Colin. Yeah, this is Beth Coe. I'm from Central Piedmont Community College, and I was fortunate to get to work with the CNA program and now the Technical Career Ladders program. And like you just mentioned, with the CNA program, the majority of our students were women. The people who came to us were women. And now with the Technical Career Ladders program, the majority of students that come to us are males. For example, we have participating certificates such as machining, print shop, auto body repair, applied electrical, and basic office assistant. The most popular one with the female students right now is the basic office assistant certificate. And when our academic advisor speaks to the students, she tries to, let them know, okay, this could also be for females as well as it's for males. But a lot of the women are still going toward the more traditional occupation with the basic office assistant. They're really not going toward the applied electrical or machining, that type of technical career.
So this is Jim Torrens at NNSP again, and thank you for sharing that. There are a couple of things that might be relevant here. Certainly, Susan Crandall and Sarabi, I believe, did work on some gender-focused analysis of sector initiatives, and I don't have the link handy, but I'll send that.
Oh, yeah, I've read her paper, yeah.
Here at the Insight Center, we're doing some related work on gender-focused analysis of industry sectors, the workforce in particular industries, and how those maybe, gender may be underrepresented in some of those, and a useful methodology for teasing that information out of the publicly available data. That methodology will be shared with NNSP members sometime over the next several months. But it is certainly a key question for the field, and I thank you for raising that question. I want to get to a question from Burke Murphy in Minnesota, and Burke, I'm going to unmute you in just a second because I think your question deals with barriers to transportation and child care and the ways in which sector initiatives can partner with social service agencies or include social service agencies to help get participants necessary support services. Would that be a fair way of describing your question?
Yes, thanks, Jim. Well, there are some studies of CET in Central California where they did create some partnerships with MFIP, and they had access to funding or tax dollars that helped allow, TANF dollars that helped allow them to provide immediate funding for child care and transportation to this targeted group. And I'm just wondering if there are any other innovative ways that your sector initiative was addressing those very real barriers, because there is a large concentration of Spanish-speaking population in the greater Minnesota, rural Minnesota, where transportation is a major issue, as is child care.
I would say that the community-based organizations kind of played the lead role in helping the individual participants get connected with the support services they needed. But that really varied by the CBO as far as, you know, what kind of relationship did they have with social services, what was available locally in the community. You know, clearly child care was an important issue for women that were participating in the nurse assistant classes. What's different about sector programs for immigrants is that you know, you start having to that you have to take into consideration that many immigrants, either because of their immigration status, are limited as to what sort of public supports they can draw on, or they're just very unfamiliar with what's out there, or question using those sorts of resources. So, you know, many community colleges now provide some child care. I don't remember if that was the case in Charlotte. If it was, Beth can type something in the chat log, and perhaps she may know better about the kinds of supports people were able to get. But those, as you say, are incredibly important issues. You know, as far as transportation goes, because these were both in urban areas, a lot of people used the bus system, but still, I think those are issues that we just were not able to quite reach, other than depend on our community-based partners.
Thank you.
So we just have a minute left, and I've got two related questions that I'll pose for our questioners, given our limited time, and those have to do with funding for these initiatives. And it would be helpful to both to get a sense of, you know, where you see the future of funding for initiatives of this type, and also maybe specifically what you're thinking about as far as sustainability of this initiative and how it will be supported long term.
Well, I think there's two sides to this. One is funding for sector initiatives, which I think is on the rise. And there, of course, a lot of the action is at the state level. And many states are embracing sector strategies as the way to go. With a good bit of the stimulus funding now, a lot of, I think, thanks to NNSP and to many others that are working this field, sector is really a big part of their consideration. So for sector development in general, I think that there's a good number of sources. In addition, there's this National Fund for Workforce Solutions that is encouraging local philanthropic funders in particular to invest in innovative workforce practices. As you can see in Latino Pathways, where we ended up getting a lot of our funding was from these smaller local foundations. Now that said, I think the prospects for funding immigrant worker projects right now are low. That there's not a lot of attention being paid, even in the philanthropic community. Some exceptions, you know, the Casey Foundation and others do some great work with immigrant populations. But as far as, you know, immigrant workforce, there are not a whole lot of great examples out there. And NCLR was investing some at some time. They're really busy with a lot of stuff right now. So it's difficult. I mean, we've been trying to continue to support even these two relatively modest projects in North Carolina, and it's been a bit of a struggle. Now, I do think as immigration reform progresses and you have more people with work status and it becomes clearer that people are staying and being part of the community, that that is all going to come around again. And I hope that projects like Latino Pathways can be an example and provide some knowledge to what's going to be happening in the next few years.
So, you know,
and let me just say, and funding through the local workforce boards and the workforce system, I think, is another critical element, as well as really institutionalizing a lot of these practices at the community college.
Well, thank you so much both for the questions and for your thoughtful answers, Colin. I wish we could keep going. The discussion is really great and at a very high level, and I just want to appreciate both your answers and the questions. I did get some more information about one of the questions from Siming Tam, and it's good to have you on the line, Siming. And he basically pointed out that wider opportunities for women has done sector projects with the gender lens, and that the Insight Center was helped wider opportunities for women do sector research and facilitate the engagement of industry employers. That was in the protective services training, an area in which women are underrepresented. There are certainly gender-focused construction training programs around the country, and women in non-traditional occupations is an area of great interest. So thank you for that contribution, Siming. I'll just point out our next webinar, which will be 2 weeks and a day from today. And that's going to focus, it'll shift gears a little bit. It'll focus on some of the work that Chicago has done on reworking their workforce development system and organizing their workforce centers around industry sectors. So put that in your calendar. Everyone who participated in today's webinar will receive an invitation. And I'll just make another pitch for our national conference in November. We would love to see as many of you as can make it there. And this webinar is a great example of the kind of content that you can expect to find at the conference. So one last thing, please do, upon exiting, share your thoughts about today's session and include suggestions for future sessions. My apologies to those of you whose questions we didn't get to. We will respond by email or by phone. And thank you all for participating. Goodbye.